I would just use the Nigerian example as a case study. We've had various kinds of conflicts across the country. In the northeast, of course, the Boko Haram crisis, and in the northwest and across the wide stretch of northern Nigeria, we've had the banditry, the terrorist bandits, and it's also the case in southern Nigeria. But I think that when it comes to the role of women in security and peace building, their roles are underplayed. They are more visible as victims. They are more visible as those who are the endpoint of receiving the mass atrocities. When you talk about most of the gender crimes that happen, like rape, abduction, and also that they have to look after their children despite the challenges that comes with the crisis, they're more visible. However, when it comes to security and peace building, you don't see a lot of them. And that's not because they don't have something to offer. It's because many times their roles are underplayed. However, the point must be made that for any crisis to be resolved in a sustainable manner, you need those who are the most affected and those who understand the dynamics of it from different tangents to be on the table, and that's really about women. When you look at the Niger Delta crisis, many of the issues were about resource control and also the oil spill and how it affects the Niger Delta communities. Women were raped as well. And then the assumption was that at the point where there would be the resolution, that those women should be the ones again to be consulted. Unfortunately, what we find is that many of them still became double victims. So, for instance, for the women who were raped, they were tossed aside because of the stigma that goes with it. They're not allowed to engage in certain kinds of conversations and certain kinds of social activities. The trouble with that is that if you're not able to deal with today's victims, they may end up becoming tomorrow's combatants. While people always speak about crisis and they talk about women just as victims, you can also have them as perpetrators because once you have a woman in that field of play, then you know it makes it even more complicated and complex. So I would say that the gender, nuances that comes with conflicts and how women are viewed needs to change. If you want to have a situation where the resolution of these conflicts and security and peace building will be in a sustainable manner, then women need to be brought to play. In Kaduna State, there are quite a number of women who have been working in the field to try to find solutions to the conflict. And what you see is once they get into the field, they are able to attend to the things that people may not be able to pay attention to. So they have more eyes for details. Say, for instance, what helps in terms of psychosocial support. They understand that the more you band victims together, they would have their own local way of finding psychosocial support. And typically it is women who are able to identify that. Because also of the way that men have been, wired to act, they feel like they cannot, attend to their emotions, the negative emotions that they feel. That doesn't mean that they don't rise to the surface. But you see, when you have women included in security and peace building, they're able to explain to you why their men will act the way they do and what should be the resolution. They're also able to pick up nuances about breakdown of law and order and why children will act in a certain way and why they themselves would act in a certain way due to the nature of the conflict and how it has affected them. So these are some of the dynamics that need to be further explored. And when again we look at how that we have quite a number of women who have been abducted, and we map it out from the Chibok girls to the Dapchi girls to quite a number of women who have now, some of them we're told, have now been shipped out of the shores of the country and are sex slaves. It will take the women themselves to be able to know how we can find lasting solutions to these problems, particularly because for some of these women and girls who are now returning, there needs to be a form of integrating them back to the society without jeopardizing security. And I think that it's important that we allow women to figure out these things because they understand the various ways that they are affected and they could provide the best solutions.
Yeah, so allowing women figure it out. And I know people will bring patriarchy and a lot of reasons why. I mean, there are times when I've had my radio show and you're asking women questions and men are the ones trying to mansplain as to what really is happening. Perhaps, from age-long traditional speaking for women, but having their voices, their stories, and their participation is the call you're making as to that kind of impact that is required in security and peace building, right? Thank you very much. So we'd also want to look at, what some of this might be cultural, political, and otherwise, the barriers and some of the challenges that, women are facing. I know you highlighted how it impacts on women. But why is it slow in getting more women in that space for decision making and more women involved in the process of peace building, conflict resolution, and security? I think at this point I would bring Gloria. You're a human rights lawyer and worked in this regard. So let's get your perspective on this. What are the major challenges, the barriers that is holding women back, looking at it from our Nigerian context?
There is the false assumption that just because women do not have classroom education, that translates to them not knowing what needs to be done. And I think that needs to just be discarded. Because when it comes to conflict resolution, you don't need to go to school. Everyone who has been a victim of conflict understand how they are affected, but particularly the women in the trenches who understand how this work can play out. So in terms of the inclusion, when there are government interventions or NGO interventions, they feel that, well, the women may not be educated enough, they may not be exposed enough. But I can tell you that when it comes to conflict resolution, you need more of native intelligence and the sincerity of purpose to address issues than you do need the education or elitist perspective to it. Because conflict resolution is not about English or how well you can move people. It's really about understanding the problems and preferring local-made solutions to local-made challenges. So I think that these are some of the issues. But also, you know that in our society, women are usually taught to take the back seat, and they would usually not push themselves out even if they have solutions. So the women themselves have to be able to take hold on the saddle and see that it's important that they lead the process, because they are often the ones who suffer the worst ends of conflict, whether as widows or as people who lose their children or as victims of gender-based violence. They are often the victims, and so it's important that the women themselves challenge themselves to move into the field of play and to find solutions.
Let's look at the role of government here. I mean, how we can engage, stakeholders, build alliances, government, international organizations, civil society organizations like Global Rights and the likes of it, to encourage promotion of women security and peace building. And I'm going to go to Gloria with this question to see how much involvement of these partners is required, the stakeholders? Because I mean, people even say down to the men, we need to bring everyone on board to seeing the need for more women to be involved in the peace building process. Are we doing enough of that already? Well, I don't think that's the right question, because we're doing enough of that already. Would have closed a lot of the gap. But how do we bring more government participation? I mean, you talk about legislation. Is it something that we need to legislate on? We tried our hands and, women need to be given 50% of this. I know the bill did not see the light of day. It's gathering dust on the shelf. But is that a strategy and approach to bringing more women, including more women in this? Gloria.
Well, I don't know. Of course, affirmative actions work. They have their own place. But I hold the view that really, when women are allowed in their own safety places and given the task of working out things, that you tend to have the women increase in their numbers. And you would see that with, for instance, the women organizations in religious centers, whether it's Form 1 or CWO or the women fellowships in churches. When they have their own space, they are able to do so much. But when you put them along with the males, or you put them in unfamiliar terrain, what they tend to do is to recoil. So I would say that it's important that women are allowed to thrive in their natural habitat, which would then mean that in their various communities, their understanding of issues should not be downplayed. And I speak to that because, when victims tell their stories, those who think that they know better want to give interpretations that are not it. So, for instance, you find people in the local communities tell you stories about when they hear the whirring of helicopters, they know that they have to be ready because probably there will be attacks. And this story has gone on over and over again. I've heard it in Zamfara, I've heard it in Plateau, I've heard it in Benue, I've heard it in Southern Kaduna. But then you hear people say, no, that can't be possible. What do you mean helicopters are flying over homes and then there are attacks? You cannot describe the realities of people for them. And you cannot also downplay their experiences, their lived experiences. So the lived experiences of women need to be acknowledged and respected. And then also when they bring their solutions, people shouldn't think that, it has to be a certain kind of way. Because I think it was Wumi who spoke about the Eurocentricity of solutions. And of course, you see that with the grant-making institutions who want to guide on what they think the solutions should be like. And with due respect, it always doesn't work that way. Because the solutions, if they don't fit into the local situation, you would just be carrying out activities but not resolving the issue. And that is why, again, I cannot overemphasize the fact that there's a need for women to curate their own interventions, whether it is from the point of view of their communities or their religious experiences, whatever it is that works as a comfort zone for them to take off, that should be respected. But also, there is also the need to push the conversation to how you can match that up and work it up and connect the dots with women who are in places of, how do I put it now, in offices and places where of authority, that there needs to be that link, which also means that beyond what we think about people and education and their standing in life, we must all realize that everybody has something to offer. Somebody spoke about how do we bring more women to the table. I would say, how do women create the tables for themselves? And however the table looks like, whether it is a humble table or it is a table prepared in the midst of the elite, let women just have their own table. And having that table, then they can then begin to work that up to finding the kind of solutions. Because you see, when it comes to security and peace building, everything matters. Every idea needs to come up on the table. Because if the ideas that are worked on are just what people have worked on in the time past, then you see, you will not be able to solve the problems. Let me tell you one of my major challenges in terms of the insecurity that communities are suffering, particularly with respect to the Middle Belt and North Central region. I know that there will be a day where some of these attacks, banditry and terrorism would leave, even in the southern part of Nigeria. But my major concern is the sleeper cells that they will leave behind. Those youths who began as informants and then they saw insecurity as a lucrative trade, and then they moved up from being informants to joining them. By the time those who are the foreign mercenaries go, we will then be dealing with these local sleeper cells that would then arise and continue to terrorize the community. And this is where I have my challenge. And so it's important that we have women who are thinking ahead and ensuring that today's victims do not become tomorrow's combatants, which would mean that there need to be ideas of redirecting energies, negative energies, into something positive and something more productive. That would mean providing more avenues for young people to go to school, to make their creative ideas lucrative and able to sustain them. Anything that allows them to see a life outside of insecurity and terrorism, those would be welcome ideas. But you see, for every locality, for every area, their realities differ. And these are the realities that need to be put in context when women are brought in to find solutions for insecurity and also for sustainable peace building.